Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, poly-innovator. Today we're talking with Nyeste, the self-care coach herself. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast, a show about becoming a poly-innovator. Please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, Dustin. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. I didn't know a whole lot about what you have been covering here, but I've looked into it and you have definitely piqued my interest. So I'm excited to learn some stuff here.
Yeah, and I'm great to have you and great to learn from you as well. Some of the research I was doing, I was like, oh, I could ask her about this and I can learn something too. Not just the audience, but everyone. Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. To start off, share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Okay, wow. Starting with the hard stuff right off the bat. Okay, something that nobody knows about me. That's hard because I overshare everything. I would say, oh my gosh, I think you stumped me right off the bat. My favorite flower is a lily. And I used to be embarrassed about that because people told me that it was the flower that people use at funerals. So I thought it was something that was like wrong, but I've embraced that. And I didn't even used to like flowers, but I'm looking out my window at our flowers and it just came to mind. I love lilies. Now the world knows.
Well, and it's a peaceful sentiment too. Even if people associate that flower with something negative, you associate it with something positive, and you could even take that negative and make it a positive.
Oh, I love that reflection because it's actually how I feel about kind of end of life in general. And like I've never been I've always told my husband, I don't want a funeral where people are mourning and sad. Like I want a party and a celebration of life. So that kind of goes hand in hand with that. And I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing. First question right off the bat, kind of going into it, you got the hard part out of the way.
Right. Be a breeze from here.
Yeah, that's kind of why I like doing it. I stole that kind of idea from John Lee Dumas, who's been podcasting for much longer than I have. And it's a really good way to open people up. And if you're already opening up about something like that, then the other questions are going to be a breeze.
Yeah, totally.
So society as a whole puts the idea of like hard work and sacrifice front and center. Why is that a bad thing, do you think?
This is something that has been coming up a lot for me recently. And I used to feel like something was wrong with me because I didn't subscribe to that notion of, blood, sweat, and tears and not being deserving of things unless you have, really worked to earn them. What I've recognized recently in my life is those moments where I'm encountering so much difficulty and pain, and I have been told over and over again to just keep pushing through it, to find a way to power through, to embrace the pain. I could never get to where I wanted to go if I used that approach. And what I've been doing a lot more recently is using that kind of block, that anxiety that comes up, that pain, as a chance to pause and really figure out why it's coming up to begin with. And I usually, if I can be still enough, long enough to really listen to whatever message is trying to be communicated to me in that moment, it becomes so clear what the easier route is to get to where I want to go. And so I think people think there's only a certain number of options available to them in order to get to where they want to go. And that just feels so limiting to me. And it's also like, yeah, you might get there, but you're not going to enjoy it once you're there because you're so burnt out and exhausted and you're resentful of the pain and how hard it was. And whereas if you can and even if you end up somewhere different than where you thought, you might be happier when you get there because you took a route that felt more aligned with, where you are and who you are. As well as you probably learned a whole lot more because you're open, you're seeing things from a different perspective rather than that laser focus of only figuring out how I can make this one thing work, even though it doesn't want to work. And right. I'm experiencing so much more productivity, results, enjoyment in my life when I'm taking that route of pausing and asking myself, like, what would feel really easeful. And I think that there's a distinction I'm making between easy and easeful. And it came with, I play a lot with language. And one of the things I realized is, people say they're looking for things that are effortless. And if you really break apart the word effortless and you switch it, it's less effort. So it's not that there's no effort involved. It's that you're taking the path of least resistance and still getting to where you want to go. And then when you're there, you're able to not only be proud of the work you did and doing things in a way that felt better for you, but you're also energized rather than depleted. So now you have the motivation and inspiration to keep pushing yourself farther. And that, I think, is when we end up getting to these places of just surprising ourselves with what we're actually capable of doing, because we never thought we could do that thing to begin with. And so now what else could we do?
Right. So what I'm getting from you here, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost as if you're playing the long game over the short term. You're not trying to grind it out just to get the quick win, because you're just going to burn out from that. You're allowing yourself to focus on the end goal, but finding the least path, like you said, the path of least resistance, and try to make it as efficient as possible.
Totally. And efficiency is a good word too. But I think the key is that it's eliminating the idea that there is a destination at all. It's this, we think we know where we want to go. And then once we get there, it's that idea of like, okay, well, now what? What's next? Because we have this idea that, everyone's like, life is so short. You got to pack as much into it as you possibly can. But if you're constantly trying to fill every moment of your day and you're doing things that don't bring you joy, then yes, life is going to fly by and you're going to blink your eyes and say, where did it go? But if you're taking that path where you're actually sitting back and enjoying the things that come up, the things that feel mundane or, not fun or exciting, but you're finding intention and ways to really enjoy every moment of your life, you'll realize how long we actually have here in relation to what we might have been told or what we think. And so it's not that you've got a couple years or even a decade to get to this point. You've got as long as you want to get there, but it's also stop limiting yourself to like, that's the only thing that's going to make you happy. And instead, maybe start thinking that, yeah, it'd be cool if I could get to that point, and I'll try a couple different ways to see, but if I don't get there, maybe where I end up instead could be just as great, if not better.
Right. Not limiting yourself to the goal itself, but to the journey that it comes.
Yeah. I think, so there's a blogger, her name's Elizabeth Ryder, and I followed her when I was diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, which she also has. And one thing, she wrote a book that she said something that really changed the way I thought about goals in general. And she said, we often confuse goals with results. And so we're thinking, my goal is to start a business. My goal is to make a certain amount of money. My goal is to start a family. But that's the result you're looking for. The goals are those things, those actions that you're going to have to take over and over every single day in order to get to that result that you're looking for. So if you can shift it and say, that's not the goal, the goal is to do ABC and enjoy those things along the way. I think it takes some of the pressure off.
Definitely.
You can just say that was the universe just like pinging that we were onto something.
Yeah. So when it comes to the goals, like you said, the end result is what people want. It's like when they look at exercise, their goal is to lose weight, but that's the result they want from it. That's not the goals they need to do to actually get to that particular end place that they want to be in. So for example, if you want to lose weight or if you want to pursue exercise, you need to figure out like, what do I need to know first? What exercises to do first? What aspects of the endurance or strength did I need to build?
Yeah. And even that is a little limiting because you're convincing yourself that, you want to lose weight. That is the end result that you're looking for. But it's like Tony Robbins says, we only ever do things because of how we think they're going to make us feel. Mm-hmm. So you have this idea in your head that if you lose weight, you're going to feel a certain way. And that's actually the result you're looking for, and not that number on the scale that's going to tell you that you're now worthy of being someone or of loving yourself or of being loved. But you want that feeling. And so there's nothing wrong with believing that losing weight is going to get you there. But if you have convinced yourself that that is the only thing that's going to allow you to feel that way, there's not a whole lot of motivation to actually figure out what you need to do to show up for yourself every day and do those things, because there's that fear of, okay, well, what if I get to that point and I still don't feel that way? Well, I put in all this work and effort and pain without that guarantee of really being happy. And so what you can start to do is see that destination is not losing weight. The destination is feeling the way you want to feel. So you can, it's like a shortcut. It's like figuring out, okay, if you can identify how doing that thing, or you think doing that thing is going to make you feel, what are some other things you could do right now that might help you feel that way? And then when you start feeling that way on a regular basis, and you can say, oh my gosh, this feels amazing, and I was the one who created this, I want to keep doing this. I want to find out what else is out there that's going to make me feel this way. What else could I do that I didn't think that I'd be able to do that's going to make me really value the effort I'm putting in and keep pushing myself towards past these limits that I had previously set for myself.
Definitely. And one thing I was going to add too is that when it comes to weight's not actually a very good indicator of progress or health when it comes to exercise. Because like you said, how you feel, how's your energy levels, how's your waistline or something like that? Like how's your overall happiness, health, and body physique evolving from that exercise, not necessarily the number on the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. People have a really skewed idea of what health is. And, we put it into so many different boxes and compartmentalize it. And, people talk about physical health and emotional health and mental health and spiritual health and sexual health and financial health. And all of those things, it's like you think, oh my gosh, that's so many things that I have to do. But all it is, and this is why, self-care to me has become this thing that I define so differently than I used to, because it is all about knowing yourself and knowing why you're here and what makes you feel good and what gives you a sense of purpose, and finding a way to put all of those things in harmony and a holistic approach to whatever it is you want and how you want to feel. And then rather than trying to feel like there's 15 different things that you have to focus on, what's the one thing you could focus on right now that's going to get you just a little bit closer to that? And also not replicating somebody else's structure or what has brought them joy, because just because they did something and now they're the happiest, or they say they're the happiest they ever been, doesn't mean if you do that thing, you're going to have the same result, because you're totally different people with different values and circumstances. So again, figuring out not what worked for somebody else, but what is actually it is inside that you're looking for, that you may be going out and trying to find in external circumstances and then wondering why you're not happy once you achieve them.
Interesting. And one thing that kind of what you're saying reminds me of is Pareto's principle. Are you familiar with it?
It sounds familiar, but I can't remember, no.
Okay, so the 80-20 rule, essentially, yeah, that's what it is.
Yes, 80-20 rule.
Yeah,
the layman's term, yes.
Yeah, layman's term. But essentially, though, like you're saying that you're finding that, like, what is your effort? If you have 5 cookies that you're spending each day, each of these cookies give you energy, and that's what you spend those cookies on, the energy on for whatever productivity you have. One of those cookies is actually going to lead you to something that's really important. I say cookies, but let's say celery, whatever. But what energy putting forth in that day are you actually getting anything out of? Whereas the other ones may give you a tiny bit of progress, a tiny bit of help, but you're spending so much energy on them, they're not worth it.
Absolutely. And that's funny because I have a different view of that principle than I used to as well, because it used to stress me out. People would say, and it's applied. I first heard of it in business. And then it since have heard it in other spheres, including health and wellness and self-care, spirituality, whatever it is. But I used to get so frustrated because I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea what that 20% I am doing that's working, because it feels like nothing's working. But what I've learned is I was so overwhelmed and I was focusing on way too many things and trying to do too much that I could never sit still long enough to be able to identify what those 1 or 2 things were that actually were bringing me results and joy and inspiration to keep going. So I would love to encourage people that if you don't know what that 20% is, stop doing things until you figure it out. Don't keep trying to add more to your plate and saying, oh, I got to go figure out what that thing is that's going to bring me 80% of my business or my happiness or my health. Pause and ask yourself, okay, can I think of a few moments in which I have already experienced that happiness, that joy, that success? What was I doing in that period of my life? Who was I talking to? What was I focusing on? And maybe can I try and bring a little bit more of that into whatever I'm doing now and see if I have the same kind of results.
Yeah. And really, too, it comes down to, are you able to focus on it or not? What kind of data points you have of like, am I getting much progress feedback, like that feedback loop of what I'm doing? Am I getting any analytics on it? And that's kind of the business mindset of acumen kind of thing. But the same can be applied to self-development, that kind of thing. What ways of measurement can you do? But for people like us who are more speedy and polymathic, it's hard to tell which ones that we're actually focusing on is actually giving us progress, or if any of them are at all. And since we're moving along so quickly, it's really hard to really get those data points.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something that I've recently been working on a lot myself, is trying not to do so much, because I do get really excited about new things and I want to go chase all these new adventures and go down all these rabbit holes that, you know, are appearing. And that is really where that practice of learning how to sit still and be uncomfortable, because you want to keep going, you want to keep doing, you want to keep seeking, until you really implement that practice of being able to sit when you don't want to sit and staying still when you don't want to stay still, you're not going to get those answers, because again, you're going out and seeking things from outside of yourself. But the only way you're ever going to know what's working is to actually ask yourself, what do I want and how have I gotten this in the past? And until you can sit still long enough to hear those answers within yourself, you're never going to find it outside, from other people, from books, from courses, from schooling, whatever you think you need to do. You have to believe you've already achieved that before in your life. You know, you've been happy before, you've had a little bit of success before, you've had moments where you've been proud of yourself, even if you can't really remember them or they seem so distant. If you can connect to whatever it was that brought that up to begin with, maybe you can try and bring it back again. It might not be in the same way, but it's believing that it's possible and that it's going to come from within you rather than from something else that's all of a sudden going to show up and say, oh yeah, that was the thing I needed to do. It's believing you already have all the resources and knowledge that you need in order to create the life you want to live.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I think that if anyone's listening here to kind of go back and hear that over again too, because there's a lot of nuance to what she was saying there. But I think one thing you kind of mentioned as well is the focus aspect. And when people want to get all their hands in different cookie jars, which I think that kind of mindset and analogy is perfect for the show too, considering that usually people listening to this are the people who are like us, polymathic, want to have all the different hands in the different cookie jars. It really comes down to being able to focus. Like if you want to pursue that other new type of cookie, that new kind of passion project, put some time aside to do it. Focus on doing it that particular hour or two that you're doing per week, per day, however much you can allocate to it. But make most of your time, most of your effort towards that one big thing that you're working towards. And then over time, you can be more polymathic by doing multiple big things.
Yeah, and I love that, because one of the connections I've made just as you were talking is this idea of, first of all, I didn't even know what a polymath was, before you really reached out. And it was one of those things I connected with instantly, because it was like you were describing the thing that I had used so long in my life as a bad thing. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, there's a name for it. And I think as soon as we have that ability to identify something within ourselves that has felt kind of off or different, but now we're able to put a name to it and it helps us understand it. Yeah. But then the challenge is finding that line between understanding it and identifying with it. And so one connection I've made is between, polymathy and ADHD, which I have ADHD. I was diagnosed with it a few years ago, but it wasn't until about 1.5 years ago I really started exploring that and understanding it. And I gained so much knowledge and growth and peace, because now I had all these answers for things that felt like they were bad for so long, that made me different, that made things harder. And now I not only had a name for it and an understanding of why it was happening from a scientific and chemical level, but I also found this whole community of people that felt the same way. And I no longer had that feeling of isolation and like what makes things harder for me. But then what I started finding is that I started identifying with that diagnosis itself, and we start to use these labels and identification as excuses and limitations for ourselves. So if someone tells you that you're not good at anything that deals with executive functioning, you're just going to start believing that anything that deals with executive functioning is going to be more difficult for you. Like time management is never going to be something you're good at because you have ADHD. So you're always going to have to find ways to circumvent that and to work harder than everybody else and just accept the fact that, this is something that other people don't have to deal with, but you do. And so when you brought up this concept, I would be really curious to see the correlation between those diagnosed or even those undiagnosed, because there's a larger demographic of ADHD people that are undiagnosed.
Yeah.
But those people with ADHD and those people who consider themselves polymaths, because essentially that's what it is. It's constantly being intrigued and inspired by new things and feeling as though, where ADHD is feeling like this diagnosis where you can't sit still, you can't focus on one thing or what you're supposed to be focusing on long enough to do what you're supposed to do. Polymath gives a totally different perception where it's like, actually, that could be a really interesting route for you to take and be able to be curious and learn a bunch of things. But like you said, it is still that focus. And there is that misconception of people with ADHD can't focus, but we actually can hyper-focus. It's that ability to sit for 8 to 12 hours at a time without eating or drinking or taking a bathroom break because you're so immersed in this new information that has captivated you, and you have this capability to really take in information that some people don't have.
Right.
But you have to learn how to break away from that to still kind of be able to live your life and not get so consumed by it. And I think that's where you're really exploring now, is how do you learn about these things to a point where you're gaining that knowledge, but then know when it's the time to move on to the next thing.
Definitely. And I think it comes down to time management, but not in the sense that most people are used to. Like you said, like they say that ADHD people who are afflicted by that particular mind aspect are not able to do time management. But I think that's not true. In fact, I think it's even more prevalent for them to do so. People like you, and I don't know if I am undiagnosed with it or not, but people like me maybe too. Basically, that dynamic or divergent really interest and curiosity, I think, needs to be focused in a micro sense, where you're setting up times where if you think like, hey, around this time, this is when I start losing interest. For me, when I meditate, for example, 13 minutes in, I've noticed I just can't keep my focus at that point. I think it's a muscle. I think I can train it a little bit more. And I think everybody has the ability to get a little flexibility when it comes to focus, but it takes a lot of effort. And if you don't want to do that effort right off the bat, focus on managing the time, like using a Pomodoro technique, where you're spending some time focusing, then taking a break, and then maybe focus on something else, taking a break. When my first job was a lifeguard, and when we are in the pool, there's multiple zones that we have to protect. We switch zones every 30 minutes to keep our focus engaged. And I think that's very helpful of a mindset for people like yourself.
Yeah, and I would even challenge the idea of, what if we stopped believing that anybody could manage time? We have this illusion that we have control over time.
Mm-hmm.
And just because we've really kind of understood how the world works, in the sense of 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week and 365 days in a year, except for every 4 years, it's like you get this false sense of control, like this thing that nobody has control over. You can somehow figure out a way to do it. And to me, that the most powerful thing, because I did do that, and one of the things that has led me away from really working with people that are so immersed in the ADHD community, is because they do think that having these techniques is going to all of a sudden change the way that your brain works. But what I found specifically with the Pomodoro method, for instance, I have a really hard time transitioning from one topic to the next, because I'm so immersed in something that I need a little bit of a breather in order to really digest and process that information that I just had, and then prepare myself to clear my mind in order to absorb any new information that might be unrelated. So for me, 25 minutes was not even enough time to get into that zone before all of a sudden they say, okay, take a break for 5 minutes and then start again. It's that stopping and starting that I found really difficult. But even that time management aspect was like, the whole idea of it is try and manage your time so you can do more. you know? And it's like, well, what if we instead tried to do less, but just commit yourself, your intention, your focus, your time to one thing, and then feel like you can have as much time in the world as you want to focus on that thing, and trust that as soon as you feel like, okay, I think I've gotten what I'm supposed to get, now I can move on to the next thing and not have that nagging feeling of like something was unfinished or there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. But I think that idea of time management is something that creates a lot of pain and resistance for people, and they spend their life trying to, you know, buy all these planners and tools and timers, and instead it's like, well, why don't you just find the thing that's bringing you joy right now and that you're really enjoying exploring and learning about, and just commit yourself to doing that until you want to do something else, and then see if that works, you know?
So what I would even say is, like, time is a construct that humanity created in the first place. Like, it's just a passage of events, basically. And so time management is just another construct beneath that we've tried to use to control time in a way. But we can't always control time. We can't control what we do during that time. Have you heard of the concept called deep work, or read the book by the same name?
I've heard of the book. I'm not familiar with the content though.
So it's more about kind of what you're saying. I almost thought you kind of alluded to focus again, and more about focusing on quality over quantity, not getting a whole bunch done, but getting one thing done really well, or focusing on it as much as you would like to. And the Pomodoro technique doesn't have to necessarily be 25 minutes. If you want to do 45 or longer, I think you can, but that's still kind of limiting to that short time span. And if you want to hyper focus for a long period of time, it reminds me more of deep work, where you're spending a few hours towards something and really putting that effort forth. And then for the rest of the day, if you feel like it, unless you have another chunk later in the evening, you're just not doing anything else. You just put all your work, main work, in that few hour time span.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is where I'm finding myself getting the most done and really enjoying what I do the most, because I don't feel like I have to constantly check the time to see, okay, when do I have to go to the next thing? Or, okay, I've got to wrap this up in a certain amount of time, or I don't feel like I've gotten to where I want to be. Instead, it's almost like I will wake up in the morning and say, like, what do I feel really called to work on today? What do I want to learn? Who do I want to connect with? Who am I today? Pretty much is the question, and let that guide me towards the work that I'm supposed to be doing. And even, you know, you mentioned that idea of meditation, how you have this 13-minute time limit, and then all of a sudden it's really hard to push through. And I have two thoughts on that. One being that, you know, as soon as you now tell yourself that 13 minutes is your limit, and after that it's going to be difficult, you have an internal clock. You don't have to be looking at a timer to know when 13 minutes is up. You have already told your internal body clock that to signal you when 13 minutes comes up, because as soon as I start feeling uncomfortable, that means I can't do it anymore. But that's actually the practice of meditation, is learning how to sit with that feeling where I can't do this. Yeah. Because when you ask yourself, what am I really doing? The answer is nothing. That's what meditation is. And that's what makes us so uncomfortable. The idea of doing nothing for extended periods of time. But when you can really build that muscle, like you said, where you can recognize, yes, I'm uncomfortable. Yes, I don't think I can do this anymore, but I'm not doing anything. So I'm just going to sit here for 30 more seconds. I'm going to take 5 more breaths, and then I'll see how much time has passed or whatever. It's tiny little baby steps towards realizing the only thing that's limiting yourself is your own belief.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like doing an extra rep at the gym and that kind of thing. They put it. I honestly allude to like meditation being the workout for the brain, and I'm sure you agree, and many other people say the same thing. But it's the exercise of the brain.
Yeah, it is, and it's going back to that health aspect of taking care of yourself in this holistic aspect, where, you know, we all recognize that we need to exercise, we need to eat well, we need to take care of our families and our friends, but for some reason it feels like icky to think about, you know, oh, I have to take care of my brain, I have to take care of my spirit, my soul, my emotions, and we're also not taught how to do it. So it's really frustrating to think I have to start this whole process from the beginning. But what I would challenge is, there's no one definition of meditation. You know, a lot of people have this kind of misconception that meditation means turning your brain off, stopping thinking. And that's not what it is. You do not have the ability to stop your brain. Like, you don't have that power over your physiological self. That would be like saying like, okay, I'm just going to make my heart stop beating for like 10 minutes and then I'll go back and do it. You can't do that.
Yeah.
But it's not about stopping thought. It's not about clearing your mind. It's about separating your thoughts from who you actually are, and understanding that those things that are being produced, those thoughts that you have, you're not the one that's creating them. You know, it's your brain. Your brain's job is to think, to make calculations and connections. It's always going to do that, and that's a good thing. But we've never been taught how to separate who we are from the thoughts we think. And that's the practice of meditation, is realizing that all these things can go on around you. There can be a million distractions. There can be things that happen constantly, and you can still find that inner peace and the thing that is going to allow you to know this is the right decision for me at this moment, because that thought didn't even come from my brain. It came from a different place. And so that's the practice of getting in touch with that intuition, that inner voice that's going to guide you through those periods of turmoil and pain and discomfort, but allow you to have that peace of mind that you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and just to jump on that point too, I often see it more scientifically than that even too, where I think of the meditation being the bridge between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And like you said, the intuition, that inner self, that kind of personality essence that you're kind of cultivating, that you're almost talking about earlier too, is that subconscious in a way. And that's the brain coming up with the ideas from the lower bottoms of the primitive minds, the primal minds, and then it's coming into our conscious mind. And so meditation, like you were saying, is not about making it clear. Maybe you want to focus on one and just try to keep it focused there, or depending on what kind of meditation technique you're going for, as you know, either letting it go and trying to keep it clear temporarily and just not getting upset when something comes in.
Yeah, and not even not getting upset, but just being okay that you are upset, you know, and not thinking that negative emotions are something that we have to get rid of.
Right.
And all emotions exist for a purpose. But if we avoid them, or if we try to convince ourselves that they're bad and we need to make them go away, then we're not actually understanding the message that they're trying to communicate and why they showed up to begin with. And, you know, it's always feeling this need to seek positive emotion and happiness and be at this like level million at all times. And that's not sustainable, but that's also not where that growth happens. And so changing our idea of not only, like you said, that what is happening between our subconscious and our unconscious, but also just consciousness in general. And it's that separation from the ego, you know, where we identify so deeply with these thoughts and feelings that come up. But when you really start to do that inner work, you can see how you're not actually creating the things that you think you're creating, and you are creating things that you have no idea you're doing. And that gets into the idea of like manifesting and understanding how your thoughts and emotions actually are creating your reality. But consciousness is definitely, you know, my jam right now. So I could go into that for forever, but it's sticky to people because they think, you know, it's woo woo, or they don't understand it. So they avoid it and they shun it, but it's more scientific than anyone understands. I mean, when you get down to it and you really boil it down to who we are just energy. And when you say the word energy, people think, you know, kind of these spiritual occult type realms, but it's the most scientific thing. It's physics, you know, it's an atom.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's vibration. That's all it is. It's how these atoms are vibrating and connecting and relating to each other. But because we're human, we can't allow ourselves to really peel back the layers enough to understand that that is really what everything actually is. And the things that you're seeing aren't reality. They're your perception, because another person sees them totally differently. And we don't have the ability to see things from somebody else's eyes. So we just convince ourselves that what we see is what things actually are.
Right. And jumping, like this metacognition that we're talking about, the scientific backing of it, I think we both alluded to and talked about, I think we both agree that it is much more scientific than people realize. And one, I wanted to use this kind of as a way to pivot towards something you've actually kind of mentioned in a bit, the multiple areas of life, the mind, the body, the spirit, emotions. There is a philosophy I've been cultivating called the four pillars, which we talked about a little bit beforehand. And these four pillars of philosophy, wow, I can't speak today. It's based off of ancient ideas, the four areas of yoga, the ideas of the Aristotle principles, all different areas of life coming together, balancing and optimizing.
Yeah. And so that I think is really, it's kind of an interesting topic in general, because pillars, I think, is a great word and one I use in my own personal practice and my work, because it is that support of which everything we're doing is built on, that foundation. But also recognizing, you know, when you think of a pillar, it's not this just big brick foundation that's so solid. It's like there's legs that are holding something up, but it can crumble at any time because there isn't this solid base. And with yoga in particular, there's actually 8 limbs of yoga. And that is something that a lot of people, you know, with this modern definition that people have of yoga, and really just understanding it from this physical exercise side and maybe even the meditation side, those are just 2 of 8 disciplines within this practice. And the majority of it has nothing to do with moving, or it's really understanding who you are, not only on a metaphysical level, but the spiritual connection to understand that you are inherently connected to every single person and thing on this earth because of that idea of energy and vibration and atoms and how they relate to each other. So as soon as you come in contact with somebody, you now have a connection. Whether you know it or aware of it, or whether you look at it as positive or negative, is up to you. But even doing things like this, people don't understand the technology has so much energy behind it. And that is people saying like, oh, you know, with COVID and everybody's stuck inside and I can't connect to people and see people in person. There's so much energy. There's actually more, because there's energy that's actually being created by the internet, by the technological base that's allowing these connections to happen, on top of the personal connection that we're creating as one person on this side of the screen and another. So it's like you start getting into it and seeing that you are not nearly as separate from everything and everybody else as you have ever believed. But it requires thinking about things totally differently.
Completely agree. Yeah. And so one thing that you mentioned to me before is that polymaths resonate with you, that idea of being that interdisciplinary kind of person. So one thing I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
That's really interesting, because I haven't had that much time to really think about it. You know, I didn't even know what a polymath was. I'd never heard of it until a few days ago when we talked. And it excites me because I think the essence of what we're moving into in this new kind of evolution of the modern world, and how not only COVID and this pandemic, but just these structures around us that we're realizing don't work anymore, that they were created so long ago for a world that was totally different. And now there's so much innovation is needed. But I was talking to my husband a few days ago, and we were talking about all these businesses, for instance, that, you know, these corporations had thousands of people working for them, and they had the luxury of being able to say, we have this very specific role that we need filled. Let's go find out and find the person that does that one thing perfectly, better than anybody else. And now what's happening, though, is that not only are they having to cut the majority of their workforce, they're having to change the entire structure of their business. So that one person, even if their job exists, they're not going to bring the same kind of value as somebody who, yeah, they might not be the very best at everything they do, but they do everything really well.
Yeah.
And that is really what I think not only companies, but just kind of innovation in general is going to need to look for. Those people who are so willing to say, I'm willing to kind of abandon this thing that I've gotten really immersed in and I feel good at. I don't think I'm the best. I don't think I'm an expert, but I'm feeling called now to focus on this other thing because I'm interested by it or there's a need for it. And I feel capable of understanding it to a level that is going to make a difference and serve people in this new modern era that we're living in. And I know you've talked about jack of all trades before. And I think that that brings up such a negative connotation for people, and wrongly so, because I think it's very inherently linked to like blue collar work. But first of all, as you can see around us right now, that blue collar work is the only work that's being deemed essential. And also it is that person that you want around, because you can't call all these specialists anymore. You can't just pick up the phone and, you know, find the person that does this thing best. You have limited options available to you. So you want the person that you know is going to be able to help with whatever it is that you're going to need help with. And that is such a cool avenue, I think, for people to explore, but it also gives people permission to feel like you don't have to be an expert in something. You know, you can just be interested in a bunch of stuff and allow yourself to be curious and talk to people that are going to educate you enough that you can then go out and do those things. But I think it might do a lot to get rid of imposter syndrome in general as well, of that feeling of like, I have to be at a certain level. I have to be better than a certain number of people in order to really speak on this or make a difference or go out and do this work. Whereas really what we're learning is, no, you don't. Like all you have to do is know more than one other person to teach that person.
Yeah.
And that is really cool now that I not only have a name to it, but this whole kind of world that you've really opened my eyes to that exists and allows me to feel like these things that I've been collecting all my life and kind of jumping from role to role and job to job are not, it's not flaky. It's not inconsistent. I've just been creating this wealth of knowledge for myself that's going to make me not only accessible, but also valuable to an entire kind of population of people that I didn't even consider myself valuable to.
Yeah, and there's so much I want to go off of that on. There's like a lot of different areas. But for first and foremost, one thing I haven't really talked about much is that polymathy, or interdisciplinary disciples, I guess you could say, because it's more of a spectrum. So you have jack of all trades, which usually gets that negative connotation, like you said. In fact, I was actually going to mention this earlier in this episode, but we ended up talking about something else. So it's really interesting how you brought it up too. Love it. And that jack of all trades, master of none, but also not master of one, is more of like the idea of putting all your hands in the cookie jars, getting a taste of what you like, knowing what you do or don't like in a certain degree. Because like if you try something, if you like riding bikes, but you never know, like maybe I really want to go racing, maybe I want to go mountain biking, you don't know which kind of subset you want to go into. You won't know until you start trying those. And then there's generalist, who has a bit more of a depth kind of skill level to it. And so you have more of a wide ranging area. And I see a lot of marketing specialists. And I say specialists in a unique way, is that like these marketing people have to know SEO. They have to know social media marketing, inbound content marketing, overall just content creation in general, and being able to get pay-per-click, all these different areas and subsets of marketing in the new modern era, like you were saying. They have to know that. And they're more of a generalist than they are a specialist. And so it's interesting how you're saying how this change is happening. And I wish it had happened sooner, because we've always had polymaths. We've always had generalists, but they've been kind of snuffed out by the society norms that specialists are the one and only that we need to have. And then like you're saying now with COVID and just even other changes like education happening, it's going to be really interesting seeing how these interdisciplinary people are going to really succeed.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because I'm reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle right now. And one of the things he talks about is that there have always been these people that have been spiritually connected, that understand this wisdom that's been passed down for millions of years, and that are attuned to certain laws of the universe that other people have either rejected or just kind of are ignorant to. And so we have this tendency, like you said, to say, oh my gosh, why haven't people seen this sooner? Why are they so blind to it? Why hasn't it happened before? And what he really is kind of is getting into is that it happens at the exact time it's supposed to happen. You know, like you said, there's all these people that have known this for so long. And I was listening to one of your episodes, and it was another kind of connection. It's always when I know I'm on the right track when things in my life are really just lining up one after another. And you talked about Da Vinci being a polymath, and I'm just like I told you, I think I just recently started rereading the Da Vinci Code because I'm doing this new exploration of my own connection of religion and spirituality from a totally different place than I was the first time I read it. But that was kind of that, you know, like you said, it was just so many years ago, they had these same kind of people that had this knowledge and this interdisciplinary kind of approaches to things and saw the connection between things that other people don't see.
Yeah.
And I have my own experience with it in the health field because I have a long history of chronic pain and undiagnosed illness. And I saw one specialist after another, and people were saying, you know, this is the best person at what they do. This neurologist is amazing. They can diagnose anything. And yet they couldn't diagnose me. And what it would be is one thing after another. If they would basically say, sorry, what you're experiencing doesn't fall within my specialty, so I can't do anything for you, end of the road. And it not only leaves you feeling so hopeless and unseen, but it makes you start questioning, like, are these people really the best? Because if they can't help me and this other specialist can't help me, but yet the people that did end up helping me were those people with the holistic approaches that everybody has cast off as woo-woo or alternative medicine. But what they do is they understand us as a whole, humans, as how we work both internally and externally, how we communicate and connect to certain things. They understand all of that to the point where they don't have to know every single wiring of your brain or every single chemical interaction that happens. They understand, like you said, they have that enough of the width and enough of the depth to make the connection that's going to at least lead you to the place that you need to go to find your answers. And that is, I think, so much more valuable than somebody that can just diagnose one thing really, really well.
Yeah, and I definitely get that kind of wholeheartedly idea where if someone's a specialist and not able to identify your problem, then you need someone the opposite, more interdisciplinary, so they can see the innovations between different paths. That's why I created my brand, PolyInnovator, Polymath of Innovation, so that way they can create these new ideas and bridges because of this interdisciplinary format. And one thing I kind of wanted to go into is that, like, the polymath idea isn't necessarily a spiritual aspect, but it could be applied to that area. It's more just a general concept of someone who is a master of many areas or really interested in many areas at the very least. And I really like how the way you've been talking about the spirituality aspect. So one thing I've talked about in the past is the 4 pillars, but I haven't been able to go deep into the spirituality aspect because, like you said, people think it's kind of floaty or woo-woo when it really is much more concrete than people realize. And so can we kind of go more into that spirit pillar, maybe the spirit pillar of a polymath or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, everybody wants to know what their purpose is on this earth. And even if you don't believe in that, there's still something that you're going to feel, that internal pain and disconnect from your life and the things you're doing if you don't know why you're doing it, if you don't understand what it's all for. And that's, I mean, the conversation that's been happening forever and will continue to happen is that people really, there's something that's telling them there's a point to all this, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's all spirituality is it's getting in touch with that thing that you were put here to do or to be or to know. But it can, like, if you want it to be woo-woo, it can be connecting with spirit guides and guardian angels and communicating across, you know, different realms. But it can also be scientific. It can be that understanding of different dimensions and the fact that we, you know, maybe we may have thought that we're just here on Earth and there's nothing else, but not only is there another universe out there, there's multiple galaxies and probably more than that. So spirituality can be whatever you want it to be. You know, it can be religion. It can be connection to your God, your faith, your understanding of your purpose on this earth and subscribing to a certain doctrine. But it can also be just, anything. It can be literally anything. And that, I think, is what I would love people to understand, is that spirituality is not any one thing. And I think that's how it connects to polymathy is, it's not just about one thing. It's about understanding yourself at such a deep level of really getting to past that point of your ego and who you think you are, to really knowing who you actually are. And then you letting that form the connections to the things you do and the people that you connect with, and what interests you and what brings you joy and happiness and excitement, because you're now coming from this place where you understand that it's not up to you. You don't get to decide what happens. You don't get to decide what you deserve and what you don't. Those decisions have already been made and they're out of your control, but you can decide how you relate to these things that happen in your life. And you can decide where you put your focus and who you choose to connect with and allow in your life and make a difference. So the spirituality pillar is never ending. It's so, I know I'm very new to it myself, but my spiritual practice is only about probably a year and a half old. And I feel so deep in it. I feel like, a lot of times I'm talking about things that nobody else understands because I'm so immersed in this now, and I've learned so much, but I know I am just scraping the surface, and I can't even imagine how much deeper I can go, because I will never be able to get to that atomic level. And but I can always keep trying. I can just keep, seeking to know more about myself and my own kind of drive and what I feel called to share and to do and create, and trust that if I'm listening to that instinct and that inner voice that's helping guide me to those places, I'm always going to end up where I was supposed to be. And then I don't have that anxiety and turmoil of, is there something else? Am I supposed to be doing something else? What am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting too how deep it can go. And it's surprising that you say you only been doing it for about a year and a half. Is that I've been pursuing self-development for almost 7 years now, I guess, at this point, since I graduated high school for the most part, which I guess kind of dates me in a way. But it's interesting how you say that, because like I've been trying to pursue my spirit pillar, but it seems like even though you've been doing it for less time, you're farther ahead than me. And like you said earlier, you don't have to be a little bit farther ahead than someone to teach them something, because I feel like I've learned today. And I think the audience would have say that as well. So it's interesting how even that short time span, you've really hyper-focused into that area of your life.
Yeah. And self-development is something I've been really interested in, pretty much forever, but that I've really gotten into probably in the last 5 years or so. But the spirituality aspect is the one that's really, really fresh and new, and I'm excited about right now. But even in what you just shared, there's so many beliefs that have been instilled in that notion of, the fact that a year and a half is too new to really have this deep understanding of something. And also, that you shared, like, oh, that dates me because I'm sharing when I graduated high school. And I think that connects to this idea we have about age and time, mm-hmm. and that certain things can only happen to certain people at certain times in their life. And that you have to be this student of a certain subject for a certain amount of time in order to be an expert and be able to share and learn from other people. But I love questioning and breaking all of that down, because what I've learned is, I spent the majority of my life focusing on what people said that you're supposed to focus on in order to get places. And I never got there, regardless of how much time and how much effort I put in. And yet when I start really putting my time and energy and focus into the things that are exciting to me, that may not have felt like a possibility or a real avenue for me in the past, it takes barely any time for me to start feel like I'm getting something out of it, like I'm being rewarded, like I'm learning and growing. And I think that's the key is, find those things that you get so excited about, that you're willing to be open-minded about, that you're willing to be wrong about, because then there's something in yoga called beginner mind. And it's this idea that when we show up for the first time to a yoga class, yes, we're self-conscious, and yes, we're comparing ourselves to other people, but we don't expect ourselves to be able to achieve a certain level of fitness or flexibility or enlightenment, because we're new, we're open-minded, we're willing to learn, we're willing to absorb. And at some point for a lot of people in that practice, and it actually happened to me in my own yoga practice, you kind of lose touch with that, where you're now seeking a certain result. You're trying to put your body in certain poses. You're trying to gain an understanding of something, thinking that, again, there's an end result that you're going to be happy with. And you forgot about that beginner of being a sponge, being open to new ideas, and allowing yourself to just absorb what's happening around you, and think that every conversation that you have with somebody, every experience that you have in life is an opportunity to learn something new, not only about a topic, but about yourself. And that is when that real growth just becomes so expedited, because you've now found that path that is aligned with whatever it is that you're feeling called to pursue.
That reminds me of something I think you'll really love. And it really kind of goes along both of our philosophies of lifelong learning as well, which I'd love to get into a little bit later. But there's a term I coined called Self-EduDevMent, which is just a combination of self-development, self-education, and self-improvement. Not in that order, but just that kind of three trifecta of these areas of life that we can pursue our personal growth. And a lot of people think of them being the one and the same. But what I think I've realized is that self-education acts like a foundation. So in that self-development that we've been pursuing our own self-education, learning these new skills, these new areas of knowledge, such as spirituality or exercise, whatever path we choose to learn from. These are self-education endeavors. So this is what I created the modular degree of on the poly-innovator side about that framework. And then there is the self-improvement, which you can kind of allude to James Clear's Atomic Habits, that consistent improvement, like you talked about, doing it every day, or at the very least very often, to consistently make that progress. Lastly, you have that self-development, which you said expedites, but I almost think exponential as a catalyst is a proper way of kind of going about it, because it's more about that hockey stick curve of growth. Because once you have the foundation and the consistency, then you can make that really big progress. And that's where I see the 4 pillars coming into play as well.
Yeah, I think exponential is a perfect word. You're right, because it's like, you can spend your life trying to make these incremental improvements and feeling like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And you kind of lose that drive to keep going. It's like, what's the point? This is so hard. And I can still see where the starting line right behind me. But then all of a sudden, it's like you find that thing that you connect with so deeply that you no longer care what anybody else thinks or what you're supposed to be doing, because you're so inspired and captivated by this new world that you didn't even know existed, that it just leapfrogs you into a totally different realm of not only, understanding and knowledge, but wanting to be a student, no longer feeling like you have to be the teacher and you have to be an expert, but kind of flipping yourself and saying, like, I always want to be sitting and learning. And because even in these conversations, there's not one person here that's the teacher and one that's a student. That's every conversation. You understand that even in a teacher in a classroom, they learn from their students every single year. That's why they keep doing it. Even like kindergarten, first graders, like you get to observe these children that have not had this conditioning that we have and don't have these beliefs that have been instilled in them by other people. And you start making connections of how much they actually enjoy the world and are just approaching it from this place of awe and wonder. And if you can be able to put yourself back in that place of like, all I want to do is learn more about this thing that I didn't even know existed. And now just educate me, but also I want to do it from a place where I'm noticing that development and growth in me. I'm feeling like a better person. I'm noticing how I'm better able to help other people because I'm so involved in learning about this. And, as you were talking, I thought about that saying that's like, knowledge is the knowing that tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And it's like that whole idea that like you think there's only one way to learn something, and that once you have it, you're going to have all the answers. But you're going to keep making these connections along in your life that you realize that one thing you learned over here that you didn't realize had anything to do with this next thing. They're actually very connected. And that was one thing that came up for me when I was listening to one of your episodes about polymathy, is that, we take what we've learned from something that we were feeling called to explore or educate ourselves on. And it's not that now we're jumping to something totally unrelated. We're taking pieces of it with us into that next thing to really, like you said, you have that exponential growth now because you don't need to start at the beginning. You have this framework and understanding from something else that may not have seemed interconnected, but everything is. So now you get to build upon that knowledge for something else. And that, I think, every time you keep doing that, you shorten the curve of how long it's taking you to get to that point where you're happy with your growth and able to move on to something else that feels, like you don't know, but you want to. And that's really where that excitement and exploration comes from, of just being like, I know that I don't know everything and I never will, but I'm going to try and find out.
Well, you're being curious, like you're saying, like it's a curiosita, as Leonardo would say. And it's very interesting. You were kind of mentioning how when you find out something that no one else is thinking that it's worthwhile and that like that's what you're passionate about, that's what drove poly-innovator to be built. Is that even though everyone told me to go get a full-time job, go to 4-year college, go do these traditional things, I knew from the get-go, even since a young age, that it wasn't going to be for me. And so that's why I started building this personal brand, and the Polymath Polycast had come from that as well. And you were saying too about how these conversations aren't didactic one way or the other. I'm a very teachy person. I can get kind of preachy in a way. And I know I try not to be, especially with these interviews where I try to be more of an active listener, because I can learn so much from people like you. And I know I already have today just from listening to you. And it's interesting how that skill of active listening I've been practicing and for this particular learning experience. So for you, what is that thing that you've been like, everyone else is saying, go do this, but no, I want to go do this?
Yeah, that's come up very recently in my life, because I've always had that feeling that I didn't like to do things the way that people did them. But because we grow up in a society in which, there's such limited imagination and we don't even understand the infinite possibilities that are available to us, we start to put ourselves in this box where now you don't want to do it that way, but it feels like you have to either do it or you have to snub everybody that said that you couldn't do it that way and go prove that you can, a very spiteful place. And instead, it's really, again, getting to know that voice inside of you that there's a reason you've been telling yourself for so long that this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like the right path for me. And that's when you really get into that place of starting to challenge those beliefs, not only of other people, but of yourself. Because after a while, if somebody tells you can't do something, they may have said it a few times, but if you start believing it yourself, you repeat it to yourself a million times. So now not only are you trying to prove everybody else wrong, you have to prove yourself wrong too. And so instead, if you can learn how to question those beliefs, which starts with understanding what your beliefs are to begin with, and then start to really break them down to the point of like, where did this belief actually come from? Is that mine? Did I pick that up somewhere else? Can I do this differently? And also not really focus on the result, but just on the action itself. So instead of saying like, I want to build this super successful brand and I want to be this thought leader that is featured in all these amazing media outlets, because then there's that pressure, while you're doing it, because you're saying, I've already told everybody I'm not going to do it their way, but now I have to prove that I can do it mine. Yeah. And instead it's more of like, I want to do it this way because that's what I want to do. Like, that's just what feels really good right now. And even if the result isn't what I thought it was going to be, it may lead me somewhere that I never even thought was a possibility to begin with. And then when you get to that place, you start thinking like, okay, what else don't I think that's possible? Let me see if I can prove that wrong. And I've been playing a lot with this idea of like, what feels impossible. Mm-hmm. And let me start telling myself that that's what I'm going for. Think of the thing that feels so out of reach that you have never even considered it to begin with. And then just start finding those little cracks where you can start injecting doubt in yourself of that belief, and instead of doubting yourself to be able to do things, doubt your own beliefs, doubt the fact that like, oh, I could never do it that way, or I'm just not a person that, is able to do this thing. And how do you know that? Have you tried it a different way? Like, and even if you have, maybe you tried it once and you failed. and you've now built this knowledge and belief off of that one attempt. But imagine where we'd be in history if everybody who created something amazing had stopped after the first time because they allowed themselves to believe that that just meant that they couldn't do it.
Yeah, they stopped right after that. For like when I think Thomas Edison, for example, he gets attributed with the light bulb, but he wasn't the one that invented it. He just invented the better version, or at the very least had people underneath him to help him. But like he kept trying over and over again. They had like thousands of patents to try to get this light bulb just right. And
yeah, because he's an innovator, like you said, and like people credit him as being an inventor, but I think innovation is the key that you want to focus on. And like a month ago, I was in this networking group where the focus was innovation, and the definition that really just kind of blew my mind was, you know, innovation is nothing other than making something better than it was. And that is, I think people put so much pressure on themselves to innovate, to create something, but you're not creating something. That's inventing. Innovating is making something that already exists better, so it serves us in the evolution that's happening. And that's what we're seeing in our world right now, is that the world around us is completely changing. It's not that we have to start over and go back to the drawing board and now create all these new things. We just have to take what already exists and be able to shift it and see it in a totally different way, and uses that we may not have been able to perceive for it before. And that will be able to continue that process of evolution. And we're seeing, you know, the people that are being left behind are the ones that are so dead set in their way of thinking because it may have worked for them for a certain amount of time, and it feels so uncomfortable for them to change or to think, you know, I'm too old to think about things differently. You know, I've done this for so long, it would take too long to figure out a new way. And it's like, what else you got to do? You know, like we've got nothing but time. So if you can start thinking about it as way, like just look at something and think, how can I make it better? That's all you have to do.
It's interesting you say about the old people not wanting to change their ways. I've met people of all ages like that. So I will say it's not an age thing per se, but I do know that like the more elderly crowd likes to be more habitual, and maybe it's just a matter of like simplicity's sake for happiness. But I do think that I've taught a lot of elderly classes in the pool. I'm an aquatics instructor. And so I've had to deal with a lot of people set in their ways where they don't want to change their patterns or routines. And because of that, I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Especially when it comes to exercise, you really have to change the variables to get progress, or at the very least, maintain what you have. And it's interesting how I was trying to convince them, like, hey, just do this slightly different thing, or do the same routine, but in a different order or in a different slightly intensity, something like that. Just slightly pivoting, slightly innovating the ideas that we already were establishing, and see what can go from there.
Yeah. And, you know, even that point about of elderly people, and I don't even think I meant elderly in general, just the fact of how you perceive yourself, you know, like there can be somebody that's 65 that views themselves as elderly, and there can be somebody who views themselves as young because they know they could have 40 more years to live or more. Like, and, you know, if you can, it's all about how we perceive ourselves, but it's also, I think, elderly people in general, you know, you get to this point in your life where you realize that those things that you had been worried about, all those anxieties, don't actually matter. And they're able to do things because they don't care what anybody else thinks about them anymore.
Right.
And that, I think, is that thing that holds us back, because we are seeing all of the possible outcomes of our decisions and our actions and how they will be perceived by other people and how we will be perceived by them because of it. And so what if we could just kind of speed up that process? Don't wait until you're 65, 75 years old to not care what other people think of you.
Right.
But figure out what you love and what you're so committed to and so passionate about that you don't care what anybody else thinks, because it will actually bring you more pain to not do it than it will to do it. And so that is that connection of again, perception of ourselves and allowing other people to make those decisions that are only going to affect our lives.
The perception of our own reality, as well as the regrets we would have at our deathbed, and how is that impacting our current decisions. And it's interesting too, because I'm passionate about polymaths, and having these people on here, I was going to have that kind of idea that you were mentioning there. I wish I can remember now. I lost the train of thought, but it's interesting how you're thinking. It's like, that's the path that I wanted to take. And I think that it's how I'm going to thrive down the line. And kind of going to the questions once again, is that how do you think, what does it mean to thrive in life? What does it mean to be that kind of happiness or almost exponential joy in a way?
I think it just means that you know yourself and what brings you whatever it is you're looking for. You're so confident in it. And it's not always just joy and excitement and happiness. Like sometimes we don't want to feel that way. You know, sometimes it's like you feel like, I just feel like I need to cry, or I just feel like I need to scream or hit something. But it's understanding why you feel that way.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, when we allow ourselves to thrive is when we start believing that who we are at the core is always enough, that we never have to create something or be something for someone in order to have value and prove our worth, that worth comes from us just existing and doing things that are so aligned with our purpose that we actually end up creating that value for other people that we're seeking to begin with. And that to me is the definition of self-care. It's not about, you know, scheduling time to read a book or take a bath or go do something that sounds fun to you. It can be part of it, but there's this, you know, kind of cliche that's going around now that self-care isn't selfish. And I've been reflecting on that so much, and it comes from, for me, the idea that I have gotten to know myself and my inherent worth so much, and believing that I have a purpose and I'm understanding what that is. And the more that I'm able to align myself with that purpose, I then see that it's not about me at all, because my purpose has nothing to do with me. I truly believe that I'm supposed to help other people figure out who they are and eradicate their own pain, because they're looking for it in external places, but it's only ever going to come from them. And again, even clients that would come to me thinking that I can cure something of them or I can solve a problem, I don't have that power, because I can't make somebody think or feel something, but I can help them see what it is that's going to solve that problem or cure that thing within themselves. Like they're the only person that has that ability. And that is where I believe that self-care isn't selfish, because the more that I go within myself and spend time getting to know who I am and why I'm here, the more I'm finding that it is not about me at all.
So that it's that teacher mentality, that coaching. And I believe that you are aiming towards pivoting towards coaching and consulting.
Yeah, so I have a coaching business, and it's another one of those things of, you know, I identify as a self-care coach just because I think it puts a term to it so people can understand what I do, but it goes so much deeper than that. And I also know that I might change that down the road of what I do and who I work with and how I identify myself. But so I have a business in which I do help people understand not only the surface level problems in their life and how to kind of get rid of the stress and anxiety, both physically and mentally and emotionally, but also I'm just wanting to help people become an expert on themselves, because I think we strive to really do too much and to achieve too much. And then we don't get that satisfaction and fulfillment that we think we're going to get when we're there, because we don't understand why we started doing it to begin with. And so, like you said, you're on this path where you have this passion about polymathy, and you're feeling called to take this route that people said was not the right route to take, and you did it, and you're being rewarded for it. You know, you're getting not only fulfillment for yourself, but you're making connections with other people that are going to end up bringing you so much more than you thought you could have. And you're also creating that connection for other people. So you're doing that thing that feels right, that's coming from like, I don't know why I feel this way. I don't understand why I'm being drawn to this, but I'm going to follow that intuition until I feel like I'm supposed to go in a different direction. And that's what manifestation is. It's understanding, like, seeing in your mind where it is you want to go. And then instead of like going to the drawing board and writing down all the steps you have to take to get there, listening to yourself and that inner voice so well and getting so familiar with it that you know you're not the one that's telling you what to do anyways. You're just kind of following the instinct until you either lose touch with it and have to find it again, or it takes you in a different direction.
Yeah, and I didn't want to label you as a coach earlier. That's why I kind of started a little bit, because I want to make sure that I respect your overall mentality towards that. And I think that's interesting that you're mentioning the manifestation, because that's not something I'm super well knowledgeable on. I've done some digging into it, but I think that synchronicity is more of a term that I align with, where you kind of talked about this earlier, where you kind of see where you wanted to go, and you started connecting the dots forward. And a lot of people do it the opposite, where they see, oh, you can only connect the dots looking past. I mean, that's what Steve Jobs' quote is all about. Like, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. The one thing I kind of believe in, I think that you resonate with as well, is that synchronicity is kind of like connecting the dots looking forward. Where do I want to go? How can I manifest myself to be there? How can I know myself enough to know what I need to do to get to that next step or evolution of my particular journey?
Yeah. And I love that, because I think that brings up a really good point that, once again, I feel like there's this, there's so many different schools of thought, and it's identifying with only one of them as right or wrong that brings us so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that we only have to look backwards in order to understand where we are so we can get to where we want to go. And it's not that we only need to look forward so we can have that vision of where we're trying to get to. It's being able to understand what's happened in your past, understanding the connections that have happened since then, the decisions you've made stemming from that event or experience, and then also being able to create that vision of where you want to go, but knowing that the two have nothing to do with each other, that your past does not dictate your future, and your future is not based on the things that have happened to you in your past, and yet neither of them matter as much as the present moment. Right. Because again, that's that, like, people get so uncomfortable with like presence and mindfulness, but when you get down to it, there is nothing other than the present moment. Like, the past does not exist.
Yeah.
And that's not a really esoteric type thing. It's true. Like, you can't grab anything behind you. You can't go back there, we know. And the future doesn't exist either. No matter what happens tomorrow, you don't know. So it is literally this second, this breath, this moment that is the reality. So if we're focusing too much on the past, or we're focusing too much on the future, that's where that anxiety comes from, because you don't know who you are in the present moment. So getting really comfortable with the idea that nothing is anything other than what it's supposed to be right now. Like, yeah, you might be afraid of what might happen in the future, but if you think about it, are you really afraid right now in this second? Or yes, you might have trauma that you experienced in the past, but do you truly believe that that means that you can't be fully happy and present right now? Yeah. So that, I think, is that, again, there is no right or wrong where we should be putting our focus, other than the fact that, like, right here, right now is all you'll ever have.
Definitely. And one thing that reminds me of is an ancient Eastern quote, but I mainly remember it from Kung Fu Panda, is that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is the present gift. That's why it's called the present.
Yeah.
It's interesting how when you put yourself in that, and I ironically, I have a hard time with that, because I'm a futurist. I like looking towards the future. I like seeing what's going to happen next, or thinking about what's going to happen next, at least. I can't really see it. But it's just interesting how that quote kind of resonates with what you're saying there.
Well, yeah, and I think that goes back to that identification with certain labels of yourself, and calling yourself a futurist makes you think that you can't focus on the past or the present. Like, I have to be more excited about what's coming up next. But that doesn't mean that you can't visualize where you want to be in the future, how you want to feel, what you want for your life. That, and again, coming back to that idea of manifestation, and maybe changing your perception of what that is, even, because it's not saying like, oh, I'm only going to focus on this one thing and then I'm going to make it just appear in my life. Yeah. What it's saying is, like, where you want to go, how you want to feel. That's that thing that you're keeping so front and center. But the only way you're going to get there is by understanding where you are right now, what you need to do right now in order to keep moving yourself in that direction. So again, it's not that you can't focus on the present or the past and also be a futurist. It's that understanding that in order to have a future, you have to know where you are now and the things that you need to do in the present moment in order to take your life in the direction you want to go.
So this leads like perfectly into one of the questions I was going to ask you anyways too, is that how can we question our own beliefs? Because it comes down to choice, it seems like what you're saying there. How can we question our own beliefs of where we are right now, or where we came from, or where we want to be, especially if like by doing so, we might be rewarded by questioning, but like we still have that resistance towards that choice and that mindset. How can we get past that?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with understanding that there is a difference between the truth and belief. And so you believe things, and that means you believe them to be true. Like, this is something that showed up in my life. I have evidence, I have references to know that this is true. But there's probably a bunch of people that can disprove whatever that is, no matter what it is. And so it's really making that distinction that your beliefs are not the same thing as reality, but that you can choose what you believe. So just because you have believed something and you identify with that belief doesn't mean you have to keep believing it if it's no longer in line with who you are, who you want to be, where you want to go. So letting go again of that attachment we have to who we've been in the past in order to become the people that we want to be in the future. And it doesn't mean, I think a lot of people are experiencing this right now with this whole conversation around inherent injustice in different race and social classes and discrimination that other people have been blind to. And it's like you get to this point where you've identified so much with a certain belief that to now say you believe something else in our society, that's viewed as bad. You're a flip-flop, you're a flake, you changed your mind. How can I trust you?
Right.
But then we're also expecting people to change their minds. So like, how can you expect them to change what they believe if they know when they do it, they're going to be condemned for it? So it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right.
And I think that is really where you get rid of that need to attach yourself to your beliefs. And when you ask, like, how can you question them? That's where it starts with questions. We think that we have these beliefs and that they're affirmations, they're truths we're telling ourselves, but they actually come, you can't have an answer without first asking a question. So it starts with, like, what is one thing you believe about yourself? Like, oh, I believe I'm short. Okay, well, I'm 5'4". There's probably other people in cultures in which 5'4" is relatively tall that think they're tall. It's not truth. So what question was I asking myself to get to that belief that I am short or I am tall, whatever it is? And then could I believe something different?
Yeah, you're right, Anna. And I believe it's the perception filter as well. And it's just one of those things, like, where is your mindset? Where is your mind perceiving? Wow, I can't speak. Perceiving where you are today, and how can that be changed? How can that be more or less like innovated into a newer, I guess you can even say, higher level of just consciousness and this understanding?
Yeah, it's like I did this meditation the other day, and I love collecting questions because to me, there are certain questions that I can ask myself on a regular basis that no matter what I'm experiencing, help me find some guidance towards wherever the answer might be. And one of them I shared with you, what if it's not about me? That's one of the questions I ask myself all the time. But the other question that came up in this meditation is, what else is possible? And that, to me, is the perfect way to start allowing yourself to explore ideas that you may not have been open to in the past. So for instance, if you have a decision in front of you and you believe that there are a limited number of options that you can take, say you think that, okay, I can make one of three choices here. And then you start playing out the whole hypothetical situation, and you can see none of those are going to lead me to where I want to go. I'm not going to be happy. So then you wonder, why can't I make myself do this thing? Because you already know what's going to happen and you're not happy with the results. So where's that motivation to do it? Whereas if you can start saying, like, okay, what else is possible? Maybe there's a fourth choice that I haven't really even entertained as an option, but that fourth choice might require me to change a belief that I have about myself because I thought it wasn't an option to begin with. So it can be a slow process, but like we talked about before, it's a practice. So the more you do it, the more that process really speeds up, and that feedback loop is exponentially shortened. Like you said, you go from thinking like, oh my God, it took me a year just to really implement this habit into my life. But then you started doing it, and then the next habit maybe took 6 months, and then the next habit took 3 months. And so that once you start asking yourself those questions on a regular basis, even if you don't feel like you're getting the answer right away, trusting that they will show up when they're supposed to, and that they're probably not even going to come from your brain. That is when you start really understanding like how you can dismantle those beliefs and find more questions that are going to help you keep doing it.
Yeah, and I think just to give a little bit more context to that idea as well, is that, like you said, that kind of secret option that you just normally don't think about. I almost think that's an innovator's mindset right there that you're employing, that it's like, what am I not seeing? Like, that's why interdisciplinary people often see it, because they can translate the knowledge they have from another area to an area that they know a little bit well, and they can find a bridge that's a new secret pathway that no one thought about. I think systematic thinking comes into play there as well. But an example I was thinking of is that I love social media marketing and the strategy behind it. And I developed, I say developed, it's more of this culmination of what I learned, a strategy that I really wanted to do. And I looked at all the tools, over 90 different social media management tools out there, and almost none of them could do what I wanted it to do. And there was one option, it ended up failing, but it was an interesting learning process nonetheless, Zapier, which is an automation tool where you can like do a point A and if this and that kind of thing. And it was interesting because I pushed Zapier to its limits because I wanted to do a multi-step strategy and that kind of thing. And like I said, didn't end up working out. And this was a recent endeavor of mine, actually. And it was just interesting how I didn't think of it as an a pathway for me. I didn't think of it as a way I could use it for what I wanted it to do. And then I tried it out, and it technically worked for a couple of days or so, but then it messed up, and down the line it might be better. But it's interesting how that was a secret path that I eventually took.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the phrase secret path too, because I think that gets back to that idea of curiosity and exploration. And, I started a few months ago really kind of thinking, what if I looked at my life as like one big adventure, like this treasure hunt that you're looking for? And yeah, you're going to come up against these things that are trying to kill you and you have to run away from, but you're also probably going to find some secret passages and some different routes that are going to lead to really cool things. And you're going to meet some people along the way that you otherwise wouldn't have connected with. And there might be the ones that are going to take you to that next level. And that's, again, Tony Robbins is a big inspiration of mine. And it's funny because especially in the coaching world, he's very, he divides the line. People either love him or they hate him. And, but he talks about the fact that people don't understand that our greatest resource is people. Yeah. And so we feel like we have to go out and find that tool or that technique or that piece of knowledge. And we have to be the ones that go find it and do it and implement it. And it goes back to that idea of efficiency that you brought up. Like, if you make those connections with people and you network and you grow that ability to know that there's somebody out here who already knows how to do this, but maybe they haven't thought about it in this way. So let me take my new perception of what this could be, their knowledge of how to do it. Let's work together to create something that didn't otherwise exist and now is way more powerful than it was when it was created. And again, that's what innovation is. And it only comes through from collaboration and being grateful for those people that came before us that created the thing, and grateful for the ones that will come after us that we know will do something even better, because that's right. Just the way it's always going to be.
It's interesting. We were talking about like synchronicity and happenstance, coincidence. And earlier today, right before our meeting today, I always try to be early. I always try to have like 15 minutes, 10 minutes to spare just in case you come early or something like that. We had that kind of Zoom tag at the beginning, which is something I wanted to avoid. Like if that happened, I wanted to be earlier or something like that. And it's interesting because I was running late. I had a friend over who's actually going to help me with the social media marketing, which is kind of what you're mentioning. Like I was able to, let's have a colleague or someone that I know who knows the same thing, but apply that strategy that I want to do and use our network together to work on this project together. And it's interesting how you're saying that.
Yeah. And your life, when they seem so connected, when it's like you have one thing that you're focusing on and then it starts showing up in other areas, to me, that is the number one indicator that you're on the right path and you should keep going in the way you're going, because that's, to me, the universe's way of saying, like, you trusted your instinct. You did this thing that someone else may not have done, but for whatever reason, you believe that's what you were supposed to do. Here is your immediate just reward, and that thing that solidifies it for you of like, okay, that was the right thing to do. Right. And I also would love to bring up the fact that, what we don't understand that our thoughts create our reality. So if we're focusing on the things that we don't want, like you mentioned, you show up 15 minutes early because you don't want that disconnect, that Zoom tag to happen. And that's why you show up, because you're trying to avoid it, where that's the exact thing that ended up happening, because you're focusing on, I don't want this to happen. And you're thinking about all the ways in which it could happen. How can I forecast everything that could possibly happen? And then how could I try and prevent it? So I can see, oh, here's all the bad things. Let me think of everything bad that could possibly happen. And then I can try and, basically prevent it from happening by doing X, Y, Z. But then because it's in the forefront of your mind, you somehow create that reality anyways. So it's shifting that focus into stop thinking about what you don't want to happen and start thinking about what you do want to happen. So you want to be on time. You want to have a smooth transition. You want to feel connected and have your guest feel like they are being able to be present and comfortable. And if you keep that in the forefront of your mind, I bet that that's going to end up being the reality. So that's something I try and do a lot, is ask myself, and it goes back to the dismantling that belief. I believe this is going to happen. So what can I do to prevent it? What if you could believe something else was going to happen? And it could be, we get these feelings of like impending doom and anxiety that something awful is going to happen. I have to put this guard up and protect myself. What if you could believe that that massive thing you think is going to happen could actually be amazing? And you don't have to protect yourself. You just have to let yourself experience it and receive it. So it's all about shifting that mindset and really getting to understand that there is nothing more powerful in this world than your thoughts and beliefs. And it might sound, touchy-feely, and it may not sound very scientific, but again, going back to understanding that that's what thoughts are. They're vibrations of energy, and you're putting them out into the world, and they will become your reality.
Definitely. So one thing that keeps kind of coming to my mind from what you're saying is that you almost have an anti-stoic approach in a way, or the Stoics really try to focus on what is that negative thing that I can prepare for? What is the worst thing that can happen? If it happens, is it really that bad? And if it does happen, is it really that bad? Or like, that's the same thing, but if it doesn't happen, is it bad either? And so they're trying to prepare for the worst outcome, and then usually try to take a more calm approach to it. But it's almost opposite for you, where you're trying to see like, what can positive outcome going to come out of it? And you're trying to shift the brain waves and shift into a more creative alpha wave state, and manifesting that positivity to see if the new action or the outcome will become better.
Yeah. And again, it's like both can be right. It's like, yeah, there can be the ability to prevent bad things from happening. We can use history to learn what might happen in the future and try and prevent it. But it's also, if that's all we're focusing on, then we're not seeing the immense possibility of these new unexplored things that could also happen that may, when they show up, feel bad or negative or uncomfortable. But once you get through that phase and are able to reflect on it, you can see that that might be the thing that got you to where you were supposed to go to begin with. And I think that's like, people think, optimism is just this, like, you're looking at everything with rose-colored glasses and, oh, it must be nice that everything is just sunshine and rainbows in your world. And you know what? It is. Like, it is nice. But it goes back to that idea of us not having control. That's all we want. We're looking for control. Yeah. And when we don't have it, we feel like we're flailing, like we're lost. We don't know who we are. But it's once again shifting that idea of, you do have control. It's just not over the things that you think you do. You have no control over the things that are going to happen, no matter how hard you try to prevent them. You do have control over how you perceive those things and how you choose to relate to them. So, for example, this pandemic, you can look at it as, the worst thing that's ever happened in our lifetime. This is just absolutely terrible. And really bad things have happened from it. Yes, there have been loss of life and jobs. And it has created this fear, though, that now people are making decisions from this place of uncertainty, and that's something I keep laughing every single time there's a commercial, like, we are in uncertain times. And it's like,
oh, those things.
There's no such thing as certain times.
Well, they're so prevalent too. Like, me and my roommate actually made a joke about it because we keep seeing those commercials.
Yeah. Yeah. And it grates on you. And, but it's also, it makes you think that you had control over everything else up until this point in your life. And that is not true. But it's also creating conversations like this where people are like, we've got to change stuff. Like, we've got to do things differently. How can we now create something that works better? Maybe this happened because as you look at every single point in history, things have to totally crumble and be absolutely demolished in order to create something new and better. And so while you can innovate, you know, and you can make things incrementally better, we weren't doing that. We were taking the things that were implemented dozens, if not hundreds of years ago in a totally different era and just trying to make the modern world fit around them. And it gets to the point where the world is like, you can't do it anymore. We're going to start from scratch. And I was talking to a few friends about how, you know, there's been this conversation for decades about climate change and global warming and the impact that humans are having on our world. And now it's like, okay, we got to go to space because we're ruining this one. Where else can we go trash? And but that to me, one of the first things that happened when everybody was quarantined, and especially in Italy, there were these photos where in Venice, you know, there were dolphins and this water that was totally black. We were actually just in Venice last year. And it was one of those where you're like, oh yeah, the gondola is kind of cool, but like, I don't think it's worth whatever I'm going to contract if that water gets in the boat. And all of a sudden it's one of the clearest bodies of water in Italy. And there's just life there. Yeah. And to me, it was like, this was Mother Earth saying, all right, we gave you as much time as we could possibly give you to get your shit together and not trash this place that you live. You've run out of time. Now, everybody, you're in timeout. Go in your house. And as soon as we did, you know, my friends in LA were talking about how they could see stars and how you could see buildings because there wasn't any smog. And it doesn't take that long because we just weren't having the right conversations. Again, we were trying to incrementally change things that were broken and trying to figure out like, how can we push this thing through to make it work, even though everything in the world is showing us it's not going to. And instead it gets to that point where it's like, break it all the way down, take it down to the absolute core, and then innovate, like you said. Now change it, look at it from a different perspective and make something better.
Well, it's like EduDevMent, where we're doing the improvement level. We already passed the education level. We had the Industrial Revolution, which is almost acts like society's education foundation. And then we kept trying to innovate incrementally, like you were saying. We needed that exponential growth. Ray Kurzweil's been saying that for years at this point too. And one thing that you kind of made me think of is like, it's not about optimist or pessimist. It's about opportunist. I actually was really excited because of this quarantine. I know a horrible like loss of life and the terrible things that happen are not good. But think about it being at home. We're changing education. We're changing the way of work. We're changing how we operate. Like we had this conversation because we have more opportunity to do so now. And I was able to start having interviews on the show because of that. People were more free to actually be open to doing something like this. And so, and there's other companies too that are trying to innovate their own things. There was a pizza place that instead of selling pizza, because they only made it by the slice, they made money by the slice, they started melting plastic in their oven to make face shields. And it's just the innovation. I really want to see the companies that don't innovate just kind of die out, let them be replaced, let them be something better come in its place.
Yeah, it's repurposing. And it's like, and it's not just repurposing things and structures and business models. It's repurposing yourself. You know, it's now asking yourself, okay, I've always thought that I had to be a person that went to work Monday through Friday from these hours. Like, I know so many people who said, oh, I could never work from home. And then all of a sudden everybody is required to, and you actually adapted probably a whole lot faster. And yeah, you might still feel like you want to go in the office. You prefer that. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. Like, that is, I think, a distinction in the beliefs of just because you don't want to do something doesn't mean you can't do it. So stop limiting yourself. And it's okay to have preferences, but I feel like don't make a decision up about who you are or what works best for you until you've explored the other option and just said, and because then you can say it, that certainty that we all want. Mm-hmm. Comes from doing it. You know, it doesn't come from thinking I could never do that. I'm certain about this. It comes from, okay, I tried it and I hated it, but now I'm certain about this thing. And that, I think, there's another thing in mindfulness and in yoga that people talk about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, that discomfort is where growth happens. And as soon as you can sit still with it, that you'll be able to repurpose it, like you said, to do something else. But what I'm really learning about myself is that the certainty comes from being comfortable with uncertainty. And that is, I think, where we're all right now. And as soon as you can say, like, I have no idea what's going to happen, and that excites the hell out of me, that is going to open up so many different possibilities for you than you ever would have possibly thought yourself capable of exploring.
Well, and it's the polymath mindset too, where you're able to repurpose because you have such a wide range of interests, curiosities, knowledge. And I think that's really the beauty of this show too, is to be able to kind of keep that open-mindedness and that curiosity strong. So kind of wrapping up in a way, do you have any endeavors that you're working towards, a secret book or a secret path for a podcast you're going for, or something like that?
Yeah, so this is actually the thing that's exciting me most, is just having these conversations with people. And it's the reason that I really love coaching to begin with, because like I said, when I coach somebody, I know I'm going to learn just as much from them than they will from me. And I'll be able to take that and reflect on it and really use it in my own life. But where I really am getting this just energy and inspiration is talking to people about things that they're passionate about, and understanding, what drives you. And right now I am still taking some one-on-one clients, but I'm also exploring doing some more motivational speaking, talking to groups. If there are any businesses that are looking for mindset shifts or to help ease transitions into different things, if you are a person that has experienced some health problems and you might want to explore new avenues, like, I just love being able to open people's minds to new ideas and explore things that they may not have had the courage or thought they were able to do, and just be able to provide that encouragement and support, but also that empowerment for people to know that everything you're looking for is going to come from within yourself. It's just learning how to create that communication with your intuition, with who you are, and becoming that expert on yourself. So I've got a million different, passion projects going on, but for me, it's still that conversation always comes back to. So if there is anybody that is looking for, to hire someone to communicate or to coach, or just to, really maybe change their mind about something, that is all stuff I'm super excited about right now.
Perfect. And that leads into the next question. I'll have links in the description, but where can people find you online?
Yeah, the easiest thing is probably my website. And I know you'll put the show notes in there, because my website is my name, annanyeste.com, and it is not at all spelled like it sounds. But same thing with I have an Instagram handle, Anna Q Nyeste, Twitter handle, and I'm playing with my own relationship to social media and how I use it. So there's a little bit of transition there for me as well, and I'm trying to figure out how I can be more adventurous with some of these tools that, again, I've felt limited by in the past few years. So I'm sure that there will be a whole different journey there, but my website is definitely the easiest way probably to get in touch with me. And I do also offer a free hour-long coaching session for anybody that's interested in learning more about what I do, or exploring if that's something that they want to try and implement in their own life and find value in. So they can actually book a free session directly from my website.
Perfect. And then what is our call to action for the audience today?
I think just ask yourself, what else is possible? What could I not be seeing here? Who could I be if I didn't think I had to be the person I've always been? And that I just want people to get adventurous and to figure out what it is they're looking for in their life. Think about if there's something that you've been craving so much from your career or from a relationship, and then see if there's a way that maybe you could give that to yourself. And so understanding that those things, I love to end these things on my favorite kind of saying, which is that we're never going to get what we want until we start wanting what we already have. And that is where that gratitude practice comes in, to realize like what makes you think that that next great thing is going to bring you fulfillment if this thing you already have hasn't so far.
I love it. And I love how you're able to get that sentence in there as well. Cause I didn't see a point to put it in earlier, but I love how you're able to squeeze it right in the end there.
Right. I always find a way.
I always got to. I love this conversation. I learned a lot. I think the audience as well, the polymaths and innovators listening in. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot too, and this has definitely opened a brand new door for me that I'm going to be super excited to explore, and I will absolutely be reaching out to you to help me figure out where this new path is going to take me.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll be looking forward to having you again on the show at some point as well.
Oh yeah, we just scratched the surface. I can't wait.